Hello again and welcome to another Morty and Glory Warhammer 40k video. In today's episode, I want to talk about the most exciting topic, terrain. Oh, I know, looking at the dirt, the ground that we battle on doesn't seem like it's all that interesting, but it is actually one of the most important factors in any game of Warhammer 40k, which is why I often bang on about it. In fact, I recently did a video where I talked about all different kinds of terrain setup, the maps that you are likely to encounter at tournaments such as WTC, and you've got ETC, and you've got Glasshammer terrain and stuff like that. And in that video, I did do a segment where I very briefly talked about GW terrain, the standard terrain maps and layouts that were actually promoted by Games Workshop as part of the tournament companion at the beginning of 10th edition. But here's the thing, at the time of recording that video, it was very much based on theory. It was based on looking at these top-down maps, but not actually playing on those layouts. And this was rightfully called out by the viewers of that video. You, the people, my people, sons and daughters of his Imperial Guard, the strength in my arm, the holders of my dreams. You said, Mordian, you need to go out and play some games on GW terrain. It's not quite as simple as just looking at it on a map. And that was a great point. It was a damn good point, and one that I couldn't really contest. And so that's exactly what I have done. And I have now played almost a dozen games on the various GW terrain layout. And so what I want to do with this episode is take you through what I learned playing on those terrain setups. What were the good bits, what were the bad bits, and what are some of the potential things you need to be aware of if you're going to go to a tournament or play a casual game on a standard GW terrain setup.
Attention, guardsmen. The Commissariat has detected you have not yet liked this video. Do so immediately, or else you will face the Emperor's wrath. And anyone who has not yet subscribed to the channel will be transferred to the penal battalions. That is all. Move out!
And so let's just get on with it. No more messing around. Let's dive right into this thing. So the first thing that you'll notice about the Games Workshop terrain, whether you're looking at it from a top-down perspective or you actually start playing on it, is it looks quite dense. You have lots of ruins, they're on big bases, and so sometimes you get this strange effect of there almost being like a huge blocking bit of terrain right in the middle of the board. It looks like you can't see from one end of the other. Now, having a lot of ruins is a good thing. It's definitely a positive because it reduces line of sight and it reduces what we call the risk of planet bowling ball. I'm not sure who came up with that phrase. It might have been Frontline Gaming or somebody else. If you know who came up with planet bowling ball, let me know. But what this term basically means is that it's completely smooth. There's no defining features. There's no terrain that is going to stop one person from just shooting and blowing someone off the table. So having this kind of dense terrain does mean that in theory the line of sights are reduced because you can't see through this terrain. Even if there are windows and stuff, the general rule is that you can't see through it, and the only way to see through it is to either go beyond it. So if you're on one side of the wall, you need to go to the other side of the wall, or you need to be wholly within that terrain piece. This will allow you to see through it. But as you will probably see from these terrain maps, often GW double dips, double layers this terrain. So for example, on layout 1, you'll see that there's almost like a box of death in the middle, but either side of that box is really hard to see through because you've got a ruin on a big base and then a small gap and then another ruin on a big base on the other side. So even if you get wholly within the ruin on your side, you won't be able to see through the other one. And so it makes these multiple layers of what should be, in theory, dense terrain that reduces line of sight and reduces the ability for shooting armies to just line up, gun line, and blow people off the table. Now, if you're a shooting army, this is, in theory, a difficult situation to be in, because you won't be able to see the enemy, and it means that assault armies will have a chance to run across the board, sometimes even hop from terrain piece to terrain piece, and then jump out and gank you and start chopping to pieces before you've even managed to get a shot off. This means that you have a situation where shooting armies can still shoot, but assault armies, in theory, have a chance to run across the board and actually get to grips. All balanced, all great, right? Hooray, GW's fixed terrain. Except it doesn't quite pan out like that. In the very first game I played on GW terrain, just a practice game before I went to a tournament, it became immediately apparent to me that shooting is actually horrendously effective on a lot of these terrain layouts. The most egregious example I can give of this is terrain layout 1 with Dawn of War deployment. This setup opens up nearly the entire map to the point where you have multiple firing lanes from one side of the board to the other. When I was at Adepticon, the first round that I played was against Orcs. And from the get-go, I could see about 50% of my opponent's army. Even though he had tried to hide it behind line-of-sight blocking terrain, the issue was that because we're on Dawn of War, what I did is just drive forward a bit, and then I could see down one firing lane on the left flank, and then I drove forward a bit on my right flank, and I could see down the firing lane on my right flank. So even though he had a lot of his army hidden behind what should have been the big box of death, when you actually look at it, there are clear open gaps that stretch from one side to the other. When you're hiding in the corners on this map, sure, you can not be seen, but there's only really one safe spot, only really one on either side, and the rest of it is very, very open. This means that the map is hugely susceptible to shooting armies. And when I went to Adepticon, in my first round, I played against Orcs, and I tabled him in about 3 rounds of shooting. It was brutal. And this is because the issue gets compounded when you consider where objectives are going to be. If you look at the one in the middle, if you're playing on Dawn of War, that's fine, it's in the box of death. And I only call it the box of death because if you're a guard player, you send anything in there, it's probably going to die because it's very close and we like to shoot from a distance. But then consider the ones on the left flank and the right flank. There is no terrain worth a damn on those flanks. They're pretty much open, the objectives. If you want to hold them, you're going to have to come out and expose yourself. And against a shooting army like Guard, or, well, a lot of shooting armies, you've got Marines as well, you've got Ironstone attachments, all sorts of things. But against any half-decent shooting army, that is a death sentence. Because this is 40k. It's lethal. I know that GW has made efforts in 10th edition to try and make the game less lethal, but the players very quickly, especially the competitive ones, very quickly unlock the combos that allow them to, as per always, boost up their lethality by an order of magnitude. And so with that said, the number one thing I want you to take away from this part of the video is that GW terrain maps look dense, but they are surprisingly open, and shooting is highly effective on a lot of these maps. But I don't want you getting the wrong end of the stick. This is not a GW bashing video or anything like that. Outside of there being no terrain, I don't think that there is actually a bad standard terrain map that I've come across, be it GW terrain, UKTC or WTC or anything like that. When it comes to terrain, it's not a case of it being good or bad. It's a case of knowing what you're going to be playing on and therefore taking it into account when you are building your lists. For example, after I played a few games of practice on GW terrain, I realized very, very quickly that infantry armies struggled, and it was mechanized armies and tank armies that had a real advantage. Firstly, because the maps were more open and susceptible to shooting than I first expected, it meant that any infantry blobs that I would have taken could have been scythed down and cut down relatively quickly. And so what I needed was hard targets, metal boxes that could take a volley of fire and shrug it off. Something that would happily, well, not happily, but begrudgingly sit out in the open and have a chance of taking a punch on the nose. Now, if you've got a 20-man infantry blob and someone shoots it and it takes 10 wounds, then you've lost half of the potential from that unit. But if you've got a Chimera, with an infantry squad inside it, which, you know, costs roughly the same amount of points, someone shoots that Chimera and only does 10 wounds to it, that Chimera is still fine because Chimeras have got 11 wounds and they don't degrade. So you haven't lost anything. And so the ability for mechanized units to be able to take a punch, for armed units to be able to take a beating, is very, very valuable on more open maps like this. To give you an example of how potent this advantage can be, in the final round of the team doubles of Adepticon, which is using these layouts, myself and my teammate Mark were running almost an entirely mechanized army. He had dreadnoughts, I had tanks and chimeras. And we faced off against a chaos army that was very infantry heavy. We had a Battert and a big unit of Terminators, multiple units of possessed, supported by characters running across the table. And it was a complete massacre. I think that Mark and I maybe lost a couple of chimeras and a sentinel and a dreadnought by the end of it. And by the end of turn 4, our opponents had been blown back into the warp from whence they came. This was because their units, as they marched across the battlefield, were shooting at us and doing stuff to us, and we were just taking it on our armor. And sure, our armor was getting ground down, and we'd take a few wounds on a chimera here and a few wounds on a dreadnought there, kind of thing. But we weren't losing any combat effectiveness. Whereas their units, because they were infantry, were every time we killed a few Terminators, that was a few less guns coming at us. Every time we took out a few possessed, that was less attacks that they could have. And so it really showed how important having metal boxes, how important having those mechanized and armored elements were on these open maps, because our combat effectiveness wasn't degraded and we could continue taking those punches across those open grounds, and they couldn't. The infantry was whittled down on the way in. So does this mean that the GW maps are completely open, there's nowhere to hide anything, and direct fire is king and you don't need any artillery or anything like that? Not at all. On every single map that I played on, there was at least one safe haven, even if just one corner with a couple of ruins on it that the enemy just could not target from turn 1 unless they had artillery. And so there was a place where I could fit about 4 or 5 vehicles at a push, realistically probably 3 or 4 if I really wanted to, that I could hide and make sure that was safe. So there is a place where your highest value assets or your most fragile assets can be hidden from alpha strikes, but there's going to be a lot of places that you are going to be able to be hit from turn 1, so take that into account. It also means that indirect fire is still very needed. In fact, I found when I was running a Basilisk and a Manticore, that was just enough indirect fire. I was able to hide those in my safe haven and shoot into the enemy's safe haven. But I couldn't have gone wrong with having a third piece of indirect fire in there as well. But that's probably more of a reflection of how strong guard artillery is in general at the moment. Long story short, there is a place on each map where you can hide some stuff. And there is a place on each map that will require you to have some kind of non-line of sight shooting or force projection if you want to target enemy units that are hiding there. Now, we've spoken a lot about damage being done. We've spoken a lot about how to be able to take the enemy's incoming fire. But there is one last aspect, possibly the most important, that we haven't covered yet. And that is maneuverability. What is it like moving your armies around these terrain layouts? Well, because you tend to find that there are these firing lanes, there's a natural inclination to gravitate down the flanks. You'll find that you want to move your vehicles down there so you can start firing down those lanes, and you start projecting power into the middle and also into your opponent's deployment zone. I found in every single game that I played that I was just essentially just doing flanking and circling attacks the entire time. And if I won on the flanks, it essentially meant that I could not really worry about the middle. There is one exception to this though, when you play on the Ritual. Every single time that I played the Ritual on GW terrain, I found the flanks completely fell away, and it was all about a massive brawl in essentially the box of death or the death zone that was the middle of the map. So when you're playing on these things, you'll find that there is a little bit of restricted movement because you're trying to go down these highways essentially, But there will be always an exception that proves the rule. So you will need a lot of units that are happy to operate on the flanks with high maneuverability, high speed. I found scout mirrors and vehicles having longer movement was very, very good for this because it had long distances to cover. But you will also need units that don't mind taking the direct route and having a bit of a Barney right in the middle. So from a guard perspective, things like Bullgrins can be highly useful just for their ability to go in the box of death and have a great time. So in summary, GW terrain is dense on the pictures, but in reality, it's quite open. This means that mechanized forces tend to have a bit of an advantage over infantry heavy forces, and you'll find that a lot of the time you'll be moving down these channels so you can direct your firepower. But there's always going to be exceptions that prove the rules. For example, there will be times when you need to just get into the middle because of the mission you will be playing. Overall, I really enjoyed playing on GW terrain. It was actually quite fun, and once I had a few practice games and I knew what to expect, I felt like I could actually leverage the terrain to my advantage. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Are you a fan of the GW terrain layouts? Would you change anything about them? Or is there another kind of terrain layout such as UKTC that you prefer playing on instead? If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing, truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full time without the incredible and generous support of my members, so thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Mad Larkin, Marcus Roberts, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Wolf, Diesel Fox, and August Varney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.